work together. And so what I found when you do these Zoom things is you can have a really nice picture, but it scrunches it like a stamp. So I have this fantastic picture of Winter Rock, Arizona, which is this fantastic, beautiful rock structure. But all you see when you put it on a Zoom thing is a tiny little hole with a touch of rock. So this is big, and I'm not very good at all these technical things, so it worked out.
Well, we're glad you made it, David.
Yeah, my cat's behind me. I had to build an office in my basement because of COVID, and it was his basement. So we still struggle with ownership. He climbs up on my desk and knocks everything off. I put it back. He does it again. And then wherever my papers are, he falls asleep right on top of them.
Typical cat.
It's a cat thing.
It's bad. And I've had some bad.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. And welcome to those of you who are watching this later on our YouTube channel. We've got a great lineup tonight. We have David Crow is going to talk to us this evening, and Barbara Cole is our reader. I'm going to go over just really briefly some Central Oregon Writers Guild website stuff here. I'm going to do a screen share and show you our website. And here it is. And here's our landing page, which is meetings and events. And then we have, obviously right here, we have David Crow's tonight. We have a workshop coming up on the 20th, which is sold out. But we have more workshops listed down here. So we've got young adult writing panel in March. We've got Ellen Waterston talking to us in April. We have a publishing panel in May, and then Kim Cooper Feindling is going to do a book publishing workshop. $10 for members, $25 for non-members, and that is live if you want to sign up. And we're only taking 16 people for our workshop, so the first 16 people to sign up are in. Beth Alvarado and Kelsey Freeman are going to do our presentation in June. They're also going to do a workshop. We've added another workshop. So Beth and Kelsey are going to do a workshop on creating a bridge instead of a boundary. We've got our old buddy, Kristen Dorsey, who used to be the vice president of Central Oregon Writers Guild, is going to do a discussion on the hermit crab form. We've got Jason Graham, our local artist in residence of Bend, Oregon. And then we've got Dina Chadwell in August, Jamie Shanahan in September, Alan Santasero, October, Sarah Sear, November. And then we've got a workshop with my mentor from my OSU MFA program, published author T. Geronimo Johnson. He's going to let us know exactly what he's going to talk about. And then we'll have our reading in December. These are all past meetings, and you can just click right on these and you'll get to a YouTube video. Also, next door to these events, we have the events that are happening, writerly events that are happening in Bend here. Okay, so today is our monthly meeting. We have the PMBA Book Awards, an online discussion called Books in Common, a couple of local authors. My buddy Jenna Goldsmith is reading this Friday from her new published poetry book. We have workshops. My wife is doing this one, workshop Poetry for Every Writer. There's a virtual poetry slam from the library, which looks really cool. Introduction to Screenwriting at COCC, Travel Writing at COCC, Blank Pages Writing Salon. There's a teen writing group at the library, and then workshop writing the short story. That one's mine, I think. Introduction to Self-Publishing, which is Tamara Marnell from COCC, and a generative writing workshop with Kristen. So all kinds of cool stuff. You can just click right on those things. I also want to point out, and I'm going to have Julie Swearingen, our publicity director of the board, talk a little bit about this, but we have a new page here called Critique Groups. So on this page, what we have done is we have created a Facebook page for people to connect to other people who are looking for critique groups. On this page also is some information on what to consider when forming a critique group and some advice on workshopping. So if you already have a critique group and if it's functional, then don't ever look at this page. But if it's if you've got some challenges, take a look at this page and see there's some advice there. So Julie, I'm going to just pass it over to you and let you talk about the Facebook page that we've got going.
Yeah, so you can find it by going to our regular Central Oregon Writers Guild business page, or you can also search for it. It's COWG member critique. It's just going to ask you 1 or 2 questions. If you are a member, if you're not, are you familiar with it? We do want to have this be members only. And so if you're not already a member, this is the time to sign up with Central Oregon Writers Guild. It's only $25 a year. And we're not going to do a lot of interaction in that group. It's mostly just going to be kind of a landing page. So if you're looking for a critique group, you know, feel free to post what genre you write in, you know, kind of what you're looking for. And then that will help people, you know, comment, and you guys can form your own, you know, Facebook chat or offline chat. You don't need to, you know, report to anybody that you made a group. It's just simply a way to kind of put it out there if you're looking for one. I think that's it.
All right. Okay, so it's just getting started. I think there are only 4 members on that page. So if you're looking, sign up for it, get on there, and keep checking back. And hopefully this will build. We'll see how it goes. This was the best way we could think of connecting people in this sort of virtual environment. When we get back in person in the fall, hopefully we'll be able to sit around and have snacks and coffee at the end of meetings and meet people and talk and create more community. But right now, this is what we got, and hopefully it'll work. Another thing that I'm just going to throw out here, it's in the works, and so don't ask me any questions yet, but we're looking at, instead of our annual harvest writing contest, we're looking at doing a member anthology. So that information will come probably in the next month or so. We're not sure how quickly we're going to be able to get it together, but we're looking at, the idea is publishing member work in book form down the road. So that's coming. And before I hand this off to Mary to introduce our reader, does anyone have any questions about anything that I can help with right now? You can put them in the chat if you want, or you can just talk. There's few enough of us that we could just talk. Nope. Okay. Mary Krakow is our featured reader coordinator, and she is going to introduce our reader tonight. So I'll pass it off to you, Mary.
Thanks, Mike. Once again, I'm going to make a plug before I introduce our reader. If you are interested in being the featured reader this year, just maybe put something in the chat box. I'll contact you. And we're looking for readers for every month except for April. I've got somebody scheduled for April. Okay. Today's reader is Barbara Cole. She's a longtime owner of a cabin in Sisters, Oregon, and she has been spending pandemic times in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, a place well known for its writing community. Her story, entitled Walking Around Steinbeck Country, will be published in Still Point Arts Quarterly's upcoming edition, focusing on place. Tonight, she will be reading When There Are No Woods, published in Woods Reader in the spring edition of 2020. So please welcome Barbara Cole.
Thanks so much. Today, as Mary said, I'm going to be reading When There Are No Woods, and maybe some of you there can relate to this. I hope so. Far from any woods today, I find myself longing for them. Woods, with a meandering and bubbling brook running through them, like the one where my mother and I used to picnic, is what I want. Today, I'm miles from any woods, instead swaddled in flowering, tropical, and colorful plants with birds and butterflies flitting around my garden. But I want to be in the woods, I tell my homesick self. Weeks and perhaps even months will pass before I will return to the woods. Not one to take no for an answer easily, I take several actions. I turn on the television. The television, you exclaim, judgmental rantings to yourself, wondering why I would do that. I select the slow TV channel, the one that Norway started. Far away from any physical woods, lounging in my snuggle and hold you closely at home chair, I watch the woods, snowy or barren, with glimpses of dark shadows pass by my windows. The Norwegian channel developers have done little more than attach a camera to the front of a train, combining it with a microphone to capture the inside train sounds. No humans, no distractions. I roll forward with no worry about owning the right currency when I arrive at my destination. No concern about baggage weight or any such travel worries. My favorite drink sits beside me. A tasty snack rests on my lap. I'm en route from Oslo to Bergen, passing pine after pine, hearing only the click-clack of wheels against the tracks. After 100 miles, and as we arrive in a small red-dotted barn village, I mute the train track sounds, sip, and begin reading. 19 Ways of Looking at Wang Wei. This minuscule book arrived last week in my mailbox. More than 30 years ago, Elliot Weinberger and Mexico's Nobel Prize for Literature winner Octavio Paz put the book together to look at how a poem, specifically a Chinese poem, could be translated. The chosen 4-line poem, more than 1,200 years old, is set in the mountains, in a forest with a setting sun. As I spot my favorite Chinese and simple character, Shan, which means mountain, I look at the character by character translation the authors provide. I see words in English which take me through
Barbara, I don't know if you can hear us, but you have just cut out. And she's, oh, you're muted,
I don't know
Barbara.
what happened. It got lost. Let me continue.
Okay. So we got as far as I hear words in English.
Oh, okay. Let me go back to that. I apologize. I see
No problem.
words
No
in
problem.
English which take me through the Chinese woods that Wang saw so many centuries ago. Echo, shadow, moss. All woods lovers know these words, inhaling them as they experience the forest tree by tree. By now, in my day of woods imagination, the sun has peeked from under the clouds, allowing my garden's tiny solar-powered fountain to trickle, even gurgle as a mountain stream might. Woody bonsai on either side of the fountain are no match for ponderosa, lodgepole, or jack pine, but they take me there, to the woods of my mind. William McNaughton's translation of Wang Wei's poem provides perhaps my most enjoyable reading as he guides me to mountains, woods, and moss. Then I return to an earlier page and rediscover Kenneth Rexroth's translation. Deep in the mountain wilderness where nobody ever comes, only once in a while, something like the sound of a far-off voice. The low rays of the sun slip through the dark forest and gleam against on the shadowy moss. I realize my experience with the book is like that of a walk in the woods. Under each fallen leaf or bristle lies something else to be discovered. A new life, even a shadow, provides a different way of looking at an old situation. According to the book, I have at least 17 other ways to look at Wang Wei's poems. I save those new ways for another day, returning now to the Norwegian woods and finding new ways to consider life. a perfect way to spend the day in the woods when there are no woods. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Very
That
nice.
was lovely. All right. We're moving on to our featured presentation tonight. David Crow, author of The Pale-Faced Lie, is going to talk to us about how he has sold 100,000 plus copies of his book. David spent his early years on a Navajo Indian Reservation in Arizona and New Mexico. Through grit, resilience, and a thirst for learning, he managed to escape his abusive childhood, graduate from college, and build a successful lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. Today, David is a sought-after speaker, giving talks to various businesses and trade organizations around the world. Throughout the years, he has mentored over 200 college interns, performed pro bono service for the charitable organization Save the Children, participated in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. He's an advocate for women. He is donating a percentage of his royalties from the Pale-Faced Lies to the Barrett House, a homeless shelter for women in Albuquerque. David and his wife live in the suburbs of DC. And without further ado, here's David.
Well, I want to thank all of you and thank one of my dearest friends in life, Trish Wilkinson, who probably had more to do with my success than anything else in life. I love authors and writing, so I think, we're all people who totally love what we do, and we love helping one another, and we recognize that a lot of real talent needs helping and nurturing. And I'm looking at your website and seeing what Trish has told me about you and saying, I absolutely love what I see in front of me. So I'll start with that. I met Trish at a workshop, and I had been trying to write a book for 10 years. Thought I had a great book, but didn't know how to write it. And maybe that's most of our mantra, right? I could just get this out of my head in the right way, I'd have something. So Trish helped me in a huge way to find a publisher. She's a great editor, and she really got me going. And I just absolutely have to start with that. I tell everybody that, and I want her peers to know that.
I swear I did not pay him to say any of this. I had no idea.
No, you didn't ask me to say it because you would never do that. But let me start with this. I think the one thing, I just hit 150,000. And Russia's second largest publishing house, KSMO, is publishing it March 1. And I have other countries looking at it and 2 movie offers. I throw this out for one reason. I went 10 years from the time I started till I met Trish, wondering if anybody would buy the book except for me. I could not figure out how to get to the place I needed to get. And I'll start out by saying I was really lucky. I had a story that hit a niche that really had some unique features, although there's nothing unique. And I want to back up one step and say, all of us have to decide as writers, what do we really want out of life? My friend Trish did not try to make $1 million. She tried to write a book that she thought would really, really help parents understand their children from a different perspective. You're not going to make $1 million if you do that. There's just no way that this field is going to get millions and millions of people excited. The people who do get excited are parents, teachers, PTAs. So it's kind of my way of saying hitting 150,000 is success at one level. Doing what Trish Wilkinson did is big success on another level that's absolutely equal. So I think, to me, it's why did you want to write this book? I never thought I'd hit 150,000. So I'm going to walk you through how some of the serendipitous things I did got me there, because I think there's some things for anybody in this. The first thing is I've had a career in lobbying. I own my own small firm, and I've got clients in all 50 states, and I've been doing this for 40 years. So I had about a 5,000 to 6,000 email list, and I swear to God, I must have sold 90% of my list, bought the book. So I hit 5,000, boom. And as Trish taught me, that's a big deal. It's getting your launch. I had a huge book party. I had really good friends help me. I had my mailing list, and I got a gigantic jump on the launch. I hired a publicist, maybe not my best decision in the sense that she wasn't, and I'm never negative on anybody who helps, but I'm not sure I understood publicity right. Just getting in front of TV cameras and radio stations at random, it's not necessarily going to help you very much. I would have done that differently. But the thing that I first did, and this was almost luck, I love writing, and I go to all these writing conferences all over the country. And I joined Western Writers Association. I met Trish at the Southern California Writers Conference. So within a couple of months of writing my book, I went to the Writers Digest Conference in New York City, which is the Super Bowl, the World Series of all writing conferences. It is unbelievable. First of all, you get incredible authors, incredible workshops. And so on the first night, I decided, after I had my drink, okay, how am I going to maximize my networking? Okay, I'm a lobbyist. This is what I do. I find people who will help me. So Karen Slaughter was selling her book, The Last Widow. Great author, 37 million copies, 35 countries. She's a superstar. So I ran up and got a copy of my book. I stood in line to buy her book. And I said, Karen, hold my book and I'll hold your book. And she's looking like, who the hell are you? And I said, Karen, by the way, you write about serial killers. My dad was really a killer. And she gives me this funny look. So I snap a couple of pictures, do a bunch of hashtags, hit it at the writers conference. I sold 5,000 more books in 36 hours. Boom, just like that. I hit Karen's list. And so I learned something from that. And so I went to several other writing conferences and pulled some of the same outrageous stunts. I ran into James Patterson at the Bucaran, and I said, James, you do books with other people. You're doing your next book with me. I'm the next great author you never met. Great sense of humor, wonderful guy, lovely guy. He goes, okay, I don't know what else about you, but you're not shy. He held my book, I held his. I did the same thing. I sold 5,000 more copies. And so I started doing these crazy things. But as I went to these writers' conferences, I did something else. Anytime there was a book that I thought was remotely in my genre, I read the book in advance, went to the authors, showed them the reviews I did, and asked them to help me. About half the authors will look at you and drop dead or forget it. The other half are very generous, very generous. So one of the authors I really wanted to court was Ann Hillerman. For those of you who are not Southwest Indian cultural readers, her father, Tony Hillerman, probably sold 20 million books writing about Navajo Indians, their culture. He basically created a Perry Mason series around Indians. Every book's a simple plot, but he really developed the whole Indian. And you can he knows more about Indian mores than most Navajos know. And I grew up with this guy. So Ann Hillerman's his only daughter. She continued the genre. I approached her and I got a little bit of, okay, I'm sure you're a good guy, but leave me alone. So I went to 3 or 4 meetings she was at. And one meeting I walked up and said, you may not know this, but I know a lot more about Navajo Indians than you do. And she stared at me like, how dare you? And I said, no, I grew up there, born and raised. My best friends are Navajos. I really do. So I got her attention, but still nothing. So a year ago, January, I flew to the Navajo Indian Reservation. And one of the big things I've wanted to do is change the name of the road that goes into the town I grew up in. Town I grew up in is Fort Defiance, Arizona. For those of you who don't know, that's where the long walk started, the Navajo Holocaust. So Kit Carson in the 1860s marched 8,000 Navajos, 300 miles, and they shot every old person, young person, pregnant person, weak person. They just killed them on the spot. And they did the same thing on the way back. And the road leading into the town, which is the Berry Road Kit Carson did this, is named Kit Carson Drive. So even as a kid, I thought this is stupid. So I got this great idea in my mind that I was going to get a resolution through the Navajo Tribal Council, get the Navajo Tribal Chief and President to do this with me and change Kit Carson Drive. So I flew out there, and the first thing they said is, well, no, they changed this years ago. So I just had taken 3 pictures and said, unless they changed it in the last 5 minutes, here it is. Well, I got this gigantic amount of publicity for this, right? And every Southwest Indian reader started buying my book. Then I went to all the university libraries in the area, University of New Mexico, University of Arizona, Arizona State, every university that had an Indian studies. And I approached their librarian and said, you need to buy my book. My book makes an important contribution. I talked 80% of them into it, took pictures with them, put it on the website. And I never, ever let up. Every day, I'd email a famous author, tell them about the book that I read, give them a 5-star review or whatever they deserved on Goodreads and Amazon. And I asked every reader, to the point where I thought my wife was going to shoot me, if they sent me a note, review my book, go to Amazon, go to Goodreads, put a review on my book. I just hit almost 14,000 on Goodreads. I'm closing in on 6,000 on Amazon. I have writers way better than me. How the hell did you do that? I ask every reader, will you put a review of my book? It can be a 1-star, it could be, you don't tell them to do anything, just review it. And I never let up on any of this. Relentlessly marketing. So what Trish taught me, and I've continued to learn, is writing a book is a great thing. 90% of its success is how you promote it. It's a business. No book sells itself. If you're James Patterson, maybe. Michelle Obama, maybe. Barbara Bush wrote 2 books about her dog. They both were New York Times bestsellers. But if you're nobody from nowhere, which is me, that ain't gonna happen. So most of us in the writing world are introverts. We're certainly not extroverts. We spend a lot of time by ourselves writing and doing stuff. And we don't love going out and selling. But my view is 90% of the books I sold was from hustling. I put 10 books in my car. Every time I'm near a library, I go in and meet a librarian. Now, COVID put a big clamp on that. And luckily, I got a huge chunk of my stuff out when you could still see people. Hopefully for all of us, we can start doing that again with vaccinations and maybe, mid-late year. But I found that there's no substitute for hustling. There's also, most of us have some self-doubt. Like I would wake up and go, oh shit, I didn't write that great of a book. Anybody could have done this. Who am I? Well, you can't do that. You cannot do that. We all feel it. So I don't know what you all do for kicks other than Trish goes for runs, I go for bike rides. I'll get my favorite authors and read their worst reviews. This is pure crap. I can't believe I read this. This guy is an idiot. I can't believe that James Patterson even puts this garbage out. And you read this and you go, oh, okay. There are a lot of people who just love, it's verbal road rage. It's their only way to feel important. So you're going to get hammered. You're going to walk in and ask somebody to buy your book and they're going to say, are you out of your mind? I wouldn't buy anything from you if you gave it away for free. You're going to get a lot of no returns on your emails. you're going to get polite rejections like, I can't believe you bothered me, as one guy put it. But you're going to find a lot of generous souls. There are more Trish Wilkinsons than jerks, thank God. And if you really hustle and you study your genre, where do you want your book placed? Who do you want to be associated with? What you will find is if you read their work, give them really honest reviews showing you really read the work, and email them, and you can find their email addresses, your success rate will be greater than the best Major League Baseball player who's hitting 330. You'll hit 330. And believe me, striking out 7 times out of 10, you can still be very successful. I was never afraid to contact anybody. And James Patterson did not endorse my book. He saw me in the audience and laughed, and he said, you need to know this David Crow guy. He could probably sell you anything. And I said, James, that's why you're doing the next book with me. And I stood up, everybody clapped. James Patterson did not do that. I didn't expect it. But when I finally went to Fort Defiance, Arizona, and did what I did with Kit Carson Drive, I wrote Ann Hillerman a nice letter, sent her a copy of my book endorsed, and said, Ann, I really understand the Navajo Indian Reservation. I really love these people. When I was a little boy, I read your dad's columns before he became a professor. I've read every Hillerman book. I've read all of your books. My book has something to add. She read it in 24 hours, put it on her own social media. I sold 5,000 more books. So I just keep doing this and keep doing this over and over. So because my book has done well in a number of categories, I have a lot of targets. So I started doing Zoom book clubs for free, of course. I've done 30 of them now, all over the country. You can get an hour and a half of my time for free anytime you want it. I'll answer any question. Don't be shy. Do that in the areas where you're strong. None of us are strong in the same area, right? I mean, Barbara, you read a beautiful passage from a book I'd like to read. It's not going to be next to my book when Amazon reviews it or in a bookshelf. That doesn't matter, right? We all have books that people love. What we don't have is enough people who know to love them. So, I mean, that's really your issue. My most discouraging moments, I go into Barnes and Noble. Hey, I want you to do this thing for my book. Local guy calls and says, okay, on Sunday, we're going to give you 2 hours. In 2 hours, I sold 5 books, 4 friends, and a guy that just said, who the hell are you? And talked to me. That did not work. I've done other bookstores in big parts of the country where, you know, my work should be well known. Arizona, New Mexico. I never sold more than 5 or 6 books. One of them, one of my childhood classmates I grew up with that hadn't seen me, showed up, and I hounded the Albuquerque Journal into writing a review. The guy did it, and my classmate showed up. He said, I just wanted to see if you were still alive. You got beat up so many times as a kid. And I said, yeah, well, I always fought back, and I've got a really thick chin. And we entertained 5 people for 2 hours. That was it. Didn't sell any books. So you're going to say, God, that's discouraging. But then you find an author or you find a local angle and you write up about it. You write it and you send out some emails. You find people who can help you with the book, maybe an editor, maybe a local newspaper person. My charity in Albuquerque, homeless shelter. My mom was homeless. I picked this charity because I wish that's where my mom could go. I did a big thing on their website, not to sell books, but you need to send money to this homeless shelter. I still sold a ton of books from it. And I guess what I learned is do everything. Don't look at any opportunity askance. if you sell 4 books in a night, that's 4 more than you could have sold, than you did sell. But if you can really nurture relationships with famous writers who are good in your field, it's unbelievable what you can accomplish. And it's amazing the people who won't try. So 2 people I met at the Western Writers of America, which I love, and I'm more of a Western writer guy, the old West and all that. They were both, the first night I got there 2 years ago, giving me lectures on what I should do. And I listened. And when my book just hit 150,000, one of the guys sent me a note. You're really famous now. I didn't even think you'd return my email. I said, I'm not really famous now. And you befriended me, and I'm going to befriend you back. And I got lucky. This thing worked better than I ever thought, but I'm humble and I'm hungry. I'll read your book and review it, and I'll put it out on my website. I'll help you. The guy sent me a note back. I am so incredibly grateful that a man like you would ever have time for me. And I sent him a 1-word note back. What the hell's wrong with you? You bought me a beer 2 years ago at the Western Writers Association. I'm the same guy. You gave me advice. I'm giving you advice. Yeah, I'll endorse your book. Yeah, I'll put it on my website. Help one another. And I said, why were you so afraid to approach me? Well, you can never approach somebody more successful than you. And I said, good God, if I had that advice, I would have never gotten out of bed once. The least well-known person ever. Other than I had a nice mailing list because I've had a lot of friends. I had no place to go. So here's my point. Don't be shy and don't limit yourself. And don't ever think for a minute that you might not have the next New York Times bestseller. Go for it. And network. And if you send 10 emails to 10 famous people and go to bed, 3 will answer by tomorrow. You don't think they will, but they will. And if they like your book, they'll help you. And that's really important. The other thing is writers are all insecure. If you read their books and review it and send them an email on what you said, and it's complimentary, and they think that you really are a sincere person, they'll immediately write you back and help. I was standing in this one books conference in Dallas called Bucharon. It's mystery and thrillers. And I thought, well, my book's not really a mystery or thriller, but there's some aspect of crime to it. And I have other books I want to write. Yeah, there's some pretty good crime, right, Trish? So I'm wandering around where authors are selling books. And there's a guy named Joe Lansdale. So for those of you who don't know Joe Lansdale, he writes these amazing kind of Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn type books. And they're always about East Texas. There's generally a race aspect of overcoming racism and some Old West stuff. And I never heard of him before. But all at once I look around, Jesus, this guy's got 100 books. He's a multimillionaire from doing. So I go Google him, and I'm like, wow. So I went off and read one of his books while I was there, and I walked back up and had him sign his book that I bought, and I discussed the book with him for an hour and he was super flattered by that, right? And I'm like, you're way too famous to be wasting an hour with me. But there he is on a Saturday morning at a book conference in Dallas by himself. An hour earlier, I had 20 minutes with James Patterson, same meeting. I got there early. I had 20 minutes with James Patterson by myself. The next morning, Ann Hillerman, 30 minutes by myself. So with Joe, I said, Joe, I just love this book. And I did, right? It's kind of these, and he's got all kinds of stuff. Movies have been made on his books. He's got this Hap and Leonard series, and he's just kind of writes these wild, crazy tales. But I had read the book so well that he said, well, what did you like best? What worked for you? What didn't work for you? And we discussed all this. And I said, Joe, can I have your email address? Can I have your address? So I'm not going to hand you a book now. You've got 1,000 books in front of you. Well, I'm going to send you a book in a week and email you. Would you at least read one page? Okay. So it took 2 weeks for him to get back. He wrote me an incredible endorsement. David Crow's book is this great book about resilience, the West, what to do. Boom, 5,000 more copies sold. So you can track these people down, COVID ever goes away. You can network in ways you don't think about, and you're not taught to do this, right? I mean, it's like, and even in any of the books I've read, no one has said, do it the way I did. But I brought my own set of weaknesses and skill set to what I'm doing. And one of my strengths is just, I mean, I failed out of high school and don't even know how I got into college, but I built a good career networking and understanding my subject matter, hopefully. And so I never miss an opportunity to convert a meeting a person into something that can help. I had one guy I talked to for 30 minutes and he said, you know, I just don't like your kind of book. And I said, that's fine. I'm sure you got a dozen 1-star reviews you'd like to share with me. And we both laughed. And he just said, I hate memoirs and I hate West. And I said, that's fine. But we talked and I learned some things from him. I went to another acquisition agent and he said, you've hit 150,000. I bet you don't even know how you did it. And I said, you damn right I know how I did it. I hustled like a madman. And he said, well, maybe if you sent me a note, I'd return it, but I'm pretty busy right now. Sent him a note. He didn't respond. That's fine. I sent a book to a woman who wrote a really good memoir and she didn't respond for 6 months. Right. So, you know, obviously we're doing all this stuff, Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. I may have sold over 1,000 books on LinkedIn, believe it or not. Facebook page, all the stuff that we do. Well, about a week ago, this author sends me this note. I want to have a 1-hour call with you. And I said, yeah, you looked me up and you found out I'm selling way more books than you are. And so when I was nobody, that was, who cares? And now you're more than I am. And I'm sure that's what she's thinking because it's all transactional, but I don't care. I'm glad to talk to her. I'm glad to do a workshop with her. I'm glad to share any time with her. So I've done all the talking. I want to stop now and listen to what you all want to ask me. But honest to God, in a nutshell, that's how I did it. And I'll end this part with, I have a lot of friends, and Trish knows one. And what they'll do is they'll say, and they try to be nice, but if a dumbbell like you can do 150,000, I ought to be able to do 1 million. I'm so much smarter than you. I'm more talented than you. I've known you. You know, I doubt you could walk across the street without tripping on your zipper. And I take it all in good stride. You're right. I am a moron. You know, I'm the dumbest 150,000 book author you ever met. I probably fell off a turnip truck and hit my head and it didn't kill me. So maybe, you know, I woke up and tried to put a word down. But my response back to them is, you can think whatever you want and good luck to you. I'll help you if I can. But it's not about being this brilliant guy. I have this guy that I wrote this brilliant book. Will you look at it and promote it? No, you'll promote it. You've got to go do this. And they'll say, well, I'm not going to do what you did. I'm not going to schlep books around. I'm not going to knock on library doors. I'm not going to go to a university and stand there for an hour and wait for the librarian. Okay, then don't. But if you do all that, and I want to compliment Trish on one other thing. I know I've done more than she's comfortable with. But she taught me write the absolute very best book you can write. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And it doesn't matter how long it takes to get your book, make sure it's perfect. And do your research, do your homework. I listen to all the author classes on masterclass.com. For $180 a year, you can get 20 of the finest authors on earth to tell you how they did it. And that includes James Patterson, Baldacci, all kinds of great authors. And the one thing they totally emphasize is if you write a book that's good enough, it's got real quality, real meat. Even if it doesn't get to a fast start, you can build on that. It's really people reading your book and saying, you know, this David Crow guy is nobody, but I liked his book. And I probably got several thousand sales off of little book club events where they say, I saw your book, I recommended it to 10 friends. Now we have a book club. And I find that location, try to find a bookstore there, library there. But the book is well written. The book has a message, as Trish taught me. Your goal is not to write a book. Your goal is to write a fantastic book that creates a space in your genre where people say, wow. Even if I didn't like memoirs, even if I don't like the woods, even if I don't care what kids' brains are like, it's a good book that has something to say. You can build on that. And when I see people say, I just can't wait to get my book out the door, say it's the last thing you should be thinking about. It has to be perfect. Do your homework, do more research, do more editing, do whatever you need to do to make sure that book is perfect. I found 5 beta readers. They're friends, but they're the kind of friends who will look at me and say, you know, you look a little fat and I don't remember seeing you show up at this and you need to go do that. You know, the kind of friends that tell you stuff you don't want to hear. And they all critiqued it. And they were tough on me. You know, this part doesn't make much sense to me. May make a lot of sense to you. And I worked and worked and worked until all that got worked out. And it made a difference. It gave me a standing in the writing community. And I've had critical books. It's been very high in the Native American, and I'm not a Native American. And I've had people really take shots at me. How dare you write about Indians if you're not? And I think about the woman, I'm trying to think of her name, Janine, who wrote the book about immigration. She wrote the book American Dirt. She's not Mexican American. She wrote a book about immigrating, basically trying to get across the border illegally. And she got tremendous criticism. How dare you? But the book was a great book and it had a great message and she was spot on. And the book took off. She got death threats. She had to have a book tour interrupted because Native Americans wanted to, she'd kill her, and mainly because she did really well with the book that they couldn't have written. But the strength of that book carried her. And I really keep that in mind. So Trish, I should shut up and see what you guys want to talk about. Mike?
Thank you, David. I think one question, so there's a question in the chat right now. Did you self-publish? How did you find an editor? What was the transition from working with Trish to actually getting published? Did you go through an agent? I see that you were published by Sandra Jonas Publishing in Boulder, but how did you get from the book to the publication?
You know, thank God Trish had enough friendship and nurturing of me, so to speak. It was a long and horrible process. Now, I want to give Sandra Jonas, my publisher, tons of credit. I want to give the publicist who tried to help me lots of credit. But the bottom line is, for those of us who've not ever published a book and don't have a name, it's tough. There was a really good New York Times critique of David Duchovny, right? He was the famous movie producer and all that. And he's written 3 books. So I decided to read one of his books, and I thought it was okay. But the New York Times gave him a huge review because of who he is. And the last paragraph was, David Duchovny would have never made it if he was David Nobody. No one would have given him the time of day. We don't have enough great acquisition editors, publishers, publishing houses looking for work unless it's a home run. This is what discourages many of us, right? Before I met Trish, I'd write these query letters. And I used to think that the people in the big houses decided, well, today I decided to crush David Crow's skull. So you'd write the letter and they go, you know, this just isn't for me. And you'd write again, it's a little bit better, maybe 1,000 more times, and I would give it to somebody else to put it in the trash. Very discouraging. If you self-publish, you get around all that. And Amazon's a great platform. But who's going to endorse your book? Who's going to write great reviews for you early? Who's going to get you out the door? That part is hard. I think the good news is there are a lot of good indie publishers. But remember this, they don't have the resources. Talking to a woman at Western Writers 2 years ago, and she got this big award. And the next year I got the same award. I never thought I would, but I did. And I asked her, she sold 85,000 books. And at that point I was pre-launch. I said, oh my God, how'd you do that? Well, my husband's a big time guy. The publishing house had one person that goes to Target, one goes to Walmart, one goes to Barnes and Noble, one goes. So she had a team of 30 people that did nothing but promote that book. And she said, yeah, I sold 30,000 through Target. Well, I stood in line at Target for 4 hours, got the manager, and he sold one book. I mean, it didn't. So, I mean, it's hard without a big team. It's really hard. And if you're a first-time author and you haven't wrote To Kill a Mockingbird or something, it's tough. So back to what I said. What's your email list? What's your friendship list? Who have you nurtured in your genre? Who are you willing to write? Are you willing to go the extra mile over and over again to people who can help you? Because there's 2 or 3 things we know, Trish taught me, that Amazon looks at. And of course, it's all on an algorithm. If you get a bunch of reviews, boom, book goes up. If you get endorsements from the right people, the book goes up. If you get a surge in sales, the book goes up. And you've got to look for, an indie publisher doesn't have any ends here, not really. So you have to believe in yourself. You've got to not be discouraged. Do not be discouraged. And believe that if you've written a great book, and you know, I have one book right here that's nothing but 200 indie publishers that'll pick up your book. But you're going to do it yourself. Let's be clear. You're going to do all the work. So when I got an endorsement from Karen Slaughter or Ann Hillerman, my publisher didn't do that. She would have no clue how to do that. She would also never schlep at a 3-day book conference to do that, right? She wouldn't stand in line for an hour to meet Karen Slaughter. Oddly enough, my publicist, who lived 5 miles from downtown New York City, has never been to a single Writer's Digest workshop, which is nuts. That 3 days in New York is unbelievable if you're a writer, because you've got the most powerful, successful people on earth all in one place. Everybody you bump into has either sold a ton of books, or they're the publisher for a magazine, or they're somebody you need to know. She told me, I sent her a note. She said, wow, you really did well at the Writer's Digest. I said, yeah, I sold 10 times more books than the $15,000 and 6-month program that you put me on in one day. Why don't you go to this? Well, you know, it's a traffic in New York and I don't feel like it. And I don't want to schlep around at 7 a.m. and wait for James Patterson. Like, do you want to be successful or do you not? And that is the bottom line. And why did you write this book? Now, for me, I want to write other books. I just finished a draft for my next book. And when you hit 150,000, they find you. And that's the one thing. If you get, probably before you hit that, you can't get anybody in the big time world to return your call. They're hunting you down. Everyone in this call can get to where I got. And I am nothing special. I'm dyslexic. I was a business guy, still am. I had to rewrite my book 1,000 times before Trish rewrote it 1,000 times before it got rewritten again. But I never gave up. I really believed I had a message. My first book came from the deepest part of pain you can have. My dad easily could have gotten the death penalty for what he did and spent my whole life with a guy who was basically a psychopath and a mentally ill mom trying to survive. So I had some power to my story. I had real passion to my story. But what Carol just read to us had real passion in her story. It had nothing to do with my story. In fact, it's not even connected, but there's passion there. So if you have passion and you have a message and you believe in yourself and you're willing to knock on doors and email and write and hustle, you're going to be successful. None of us, I think, thinks we're going to make $1 million and retire off of our books. Now, some of us might, but that's not why you started, and that's not a goal. You know, I compare it to when I was in high school. I was going to make any sports team, so when I got to the major leagues and was famous, I would have a launch pad. And of course, that's a complete joke, right? That's not going to happen for you. But in our writing world, we can make things happen that you can't make happen in any other world. You're the complete master of your universe. You can research and learn and improve and do all these things and beat everybody in your field just using your brain and your tenacity. All of us. And I don't know if my next book will be any good at all, but I believe in myself and I think I can do it again. And I honestly think that self-doubt and not letting it get you is so big in this. And then not being afraid of being rejected when you go out on the road or you send an email. You know, it hurts when somebody reviews a book and said, this really stinks, you can't write, you're a horrible human being, you belong in jail. I have about 100 of them. And if they call me, I say, I do belong in jail. Come and arrest me, I'll go with you and we'll serve time together. I don't really care. I'm going to be focused on the people who do like me, who do like my book, and I'm going to find them more and more and more. I now have
David,
prisons writing me, and I respond to those letters. I'm teaching 2 college classes in abnormal psychology because of what I went through. And I probably am going to do 50 more Zoom book clubs before the year's out.
David, a couple more questions for you. One, Barbara wants to know what about your experience with beta readers, and Carolyn wants to know that with all these book clubs and following James Patterson around and all that, do you ever sleep, and when do you write?
Do I ever see what? I'm sorry.
Do you ever sleep?
My hearing up. Oh, do I ever sleep? Yeah, I do sleep. the point, I think, isn't that I spend all my time at this, it's that I love what I do. I probably do most of my work from 5 a.m. till 9 a.m. in the morning. And the beta readers, to go back to that, pick people that are really honest with you, that aren't afraid to tell you that what you did doesn't work for them. Most of what we do wrong in writing works in our head, but it doesn't translate, in my view. In other words, you know exactly what you're trying to say, and you're not objective enough because you're you to know when it's working and not working all the time. So one of my friends, who's turned out to be one of my best beta readers, said, I've known you for 30 odd years, and I know what you're trying to say. You haven't said it. And I spent maybe 80 to 100 hours on a chapter that basically, I think, changed the entire book. So get those beta readers to be really objective, not your best friend, not your aunt, not your brother-in-law, not the guy next door who's going to have to face you for the next, till you move. Find people that you know that care about you, but don't care that they hurt your feelings. Important. And where it's really important, like
David.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was gonna, if you're when you after you tell us where it's really important, Judy wants to know if you have the best conferences to attend. What recommendations you have for that?
Yes, start with Writer's Digest. Get to New York City in August. By late August, we may reopen. I mean, I praise to it. I mean, you can do it virtually, but Writer's Digest is incredible. Subscribe to Writer's Digest 6 times a year. It is the best. It is the best. Your genre. So I'm a Western guy, and I wrote about Arizona, New Mexico, growing up there in the 50s and 60s. I knew my next books, I want to do more about that era in an earlier time. I showed up at the first Western Writers of America conference, something I Googled, and I wrote my $250 check. And after about 4 hours, I realized I'd died and gone to heaven. That was my place in the world. The first guy I met there was a guy named Jeff Gwynn. So being a Western guy, I grew up on Kit Carson, Wyatt Earp, Cowboys versus Indians, all that. I look over across the room at this opening dinner, and there's Jeff Gwynn. So Jeff is an incredibly successful author. He's written about 10 or 12 books. I think each of them have sold somewhere between 8 and 10 million. I mean, he wrote the book on Jonestown, Jim Jones. He wrote the book on Charles Manson. He wrote the book on Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. So when he writes these books, they're really successful. So he wrote a book I read 20 years ago called The Last Gunfight. So I'm in a bookstore 20 years ago, and it says, what really happened at the gunfight of OK Corral? I'm like, hey, I grew up there. I know everything about this. Buy the book, read it, and go, oh my God, I didn't know anything about this. This guy wrote the most beautiful book, How This Town Formed. Wyatt Earp and his brothers were basically thugs. They used the law and owning saloons and even the prostitution stuff just to, Doc Holliday was just basically a murderer. Anyway, I read this book and it changed. I said, oh my God, I didn't know. I grew up here. I read everything. I didn't know anything. So I'm sitting there and there's Jeff Gwynn. So I get up and walk across the room. First writing conference other than the one I met with Trish. And I wait for him to finish. And I say, Jeff, can I talk to you a minute? I told him what I just told you. It's the greatest book ever. I had no idea. I absolutely am in love with this book. and there's 3 or 4 of your books here. I'm going to buy all of them. So we talked for 30 minutes. And on the way out, I said, Jeff, I know that I shouldn't do what I'm about to do, but I'm gonna. If I send you a paragraph, maybe a page, will you read it? And if you say, it sucks, this is so bad that I can't even puke it through the screen, I'll get it. If you projectile vomit, I'll come to your house and clean up your house. But will you look at one page? He smiles at me. He said, yeah, I'll do that for you. And so 2 weeks later, I email him the whole PDF. Why? Because I'm me. Maybe he'll buy it. So he says, when does this need to be reviewed? I said, well, within the next month. Well, no, I'm finishing a book. You can't just send this to me and expect me to do it overnight. And I thought, oh man, I really offended this guy. Darn it. So I waited 2 more weeks. His book came out, read it and reviewed it. He probably doesn't know that because he's famous. And I said, Jeff, can I try again? Yeah. He read the book in like probably 8 hours. And the review he gave me made me cry. He said, you must read this book. It is filled with considerable wisdom and an ending like no other. This book is one of the finest books I've ever read. I sent him a note right back and I said, oh my God, you're Jeff Gwynn. I'm nobody. You know what he did? And this is what I'm going to tell you. You're a good guy and you wrote a good book. And I try to help people that I think deserve it. You talked to me for a long time. It was clear you knew everything about what I had written. I think you're a sincere guy. I was going to read till I was going to stop, and I was just going to stop. I stopped on the last page. You deserve it. And I thought, oh my God, you can do that. Anybody here can do that. So 9 out of 10 Jeff Gwynns might not even respond. 1 will, maybe 2, 3 if my luck is any. The other 7 won't. The woman who wrote Ann Patchett. Ann was at the 6th Street Synagogue in DC, very famous. Jewish synagogue, really old. I showed up, sat through her talk, and she's a stepmom, never had kids of her own, married a much older man, as she put it. And she always worried she'd be a bad stepmom. So I stood in line, got her to sign the book, and I said, Ann, I had a stepmother that would, if she was a man, it would have been Adolf Hitler. And the worst. Would you look at just one chapter? And never heard from her again. I emailed her over and over. And she had given in the talk, she said, you never know who will respond. I sent something to Tom Hanks on an audiobook and he responded immediately. Well, she's Ann Patchett. She's great. And I said, okay, Ann, I'm pulling a Tom Hanks on you. So I got her going, but she didn't look at the book. Don't let that discourage you. People will look at your book. People you don't think that will return your email will. Do those things. Do all of those things. Everything I said and 10 things I didn't say, do it all.
And David, that could have just been timing. Like you may have given her your book at a different time and she would have looked at it because we don't know what's going on in people's lives. I think a lot of times we take things personally that aren't personal.
They're not meant to be.
Right.
But you know, we all love writing and we have a great writing community, right? I mean, I've had people ask me, well, why'd you do all this? You know, do you sleep? I love this. I love books. I love authors. I love writing. I read as much as I can every day. Every book I read, if I like it, I give it a review in Goodreads and Amazon and send a note to the author. And I do it every single time. And I probably read 5 or 6 books a month, maybe more, depends on how thick. I never fail to do that. When I watch a master class, and again, for 180 bucks, you would not believe what masterclass.com offers.
Right.
Every time I go through their classes. Malcolm Gladwell did one. So I sent him a book and a note. I mean, will I hear back from Malcolm Gladwell? I don't know, but I wouldn't bet I won't. David Baldacci lives about 7 or 8 miles from me, and I read a couple of his books, and I'm going to send him a book and a note. Will I hear back from him? I don't know, but I'm willing to do that. If I do it 10 times, 3 people that are so famous you can't believe it will respond. I promise you. We're a generous community, and a lot of people who've made it big remember when they were nobody. They really do. And as Trish said, a lot of it's timing. Anne had just put out this great new book called The Dutch House. I think she did a big tour. Again, this was pre-COVID. The odds are she was gone the next 20 weekends, and
Right.
my book just didn't get there.
All right. Other questions from anyone? Take one more question.
Denise has
Denise?
a question.
Just
I put a
unmute
question-
yourself and ask. There you go.
I'm sorry, I put a question in the chat. Almost 4 years ago, I'm a journalist, so I've published hundreds of articles, but only one book, Why the Undocumented Belong to America. I interviewed a woman who was in sanctuary at my church in Tucson, Arizona for 15 months. She was kind of a local celebrity, and I used her story to go into all the reasons why it's so hard to immigrate legally, why undocumented immigrants contribute so much to this country, and why we need a new legalization program. And I have a lot of background and connections. I ended up with a 20,000 word manuscript. I didn't think it was long enough to actually, I tried a few publishers and got rejected. So I self-published through CreateSpace that Amazon used to have. And now I'm sorry I did that because I had to do all my own promotions. I got a wonderful book review in the Arizona Daily Star. I got a 1-minute thing on Arizona Public Media. And the woman who interviewed me told me that she heard that members of Congress were reading my book. But I've sold about 133 copies, and it's been 4 years. I think it's still relevant because Biden is talking about what I would like to see happen, a legalization program like we haven't had since 1986.
Yeah.
So
I have some advice for you. My lobbying firm, we do what's called H-2B, and these are temporary workers that work 3 or 4 months and go home. I have an incredible number of contacts in the immigration world. My partner's famous, I'm not. So you send me your book, and first of all, let's look in Congress at the members of Congress, including your Arizona member, Senator Sinema, Kristen, I'm not saying her name right, Sinema. Have you written her and said, I've got this book on immigration, I think these things can help? Have you done that?
I still lived in Tucson. I live in Central Oregon now, in Redmond. But yes, I did send copies to, I think, the senators. I may have sent a copy to Congressman Raul Grijalva. I did. I didn't get a response, but I had.
Did you call their office and talk to the legislative assistant that does immigration?
No, I hadn't. Yeah.
So you have to take that step.
Mhm.
I compare it to, I'm going to put a bunch of grass seed and put it on concrete. I'm going to
Right.
pour water on it. It's
Right.
not growing. So you can't start at the top. An average senator gets between 10 and 15,000 communications a week.
Oh.
A legislative assistant that handles a subject will read your stuff.
Okay.
Call them, send it to their, and this is all easily, you can get it on Google.
Okay, thank you.
When your friends have read the book, is there anything missing? Is there a way you could have presented it differently?
I sold most of the copies through my church and different migrant aid organizations in Tucson, where I used to edit a newsletter, and I used all the connections I had.
My
Right.
opinion is you're a success. But let me tell you something I learned along the way. So there's two kinds of books. There's books like Trish that make a difference in your life. And they're not going to be, that's not a beach read for a 65-year-old guy on a cruise. It's not a murder mystery. It's not. So what Trish did made her very successful because that's what she sought to do. You too. But if you want to sell a bunch of books, right? There's a couple things that I think you should really keep in mind. One is I spent maybe 100 hours on the cover, the title, and the first page. So the New York Journal of Books reviewed my book and recommended it. I'm like, oh my God. So I said, why? And they said, we line up books like in a football field type thing on a shelf. You have 30 seconds. The reviewers walk up. Do I like the cover? Do I like the title? They'll open it, and if they get to the second sentence, they pick it. 8 out of 10 books don't make that. So keep in mind your cover, your title, and your first page. So your book probably is better than American Dirt, who's now, I think, at 9 million in sales. It says American Dirt, okay? Great cover. The opening page is there's a woman who's in her home in Mexico. 13 of the 15 members of her family have been murdered. She and her son barely get out before they're murdered, and you're on this incredible path till they get to the US. So her book grabs you. American Dirt's interesting, like, you know, it's got a kind of a double entendre there, and you take off like a rocket. So people don't spend enough time thinking about that, because even though I love that you did it with your church, and I think you're a success. My view is you have won. You've done something important, and you've done it with people who are important to you and who count, people in religious fields. But if you want to sell a book, keep 3 things in mind. You're in the entertainment business. Now, again, if you write a book about children's brains, no, you're not. But for most of us, because there's nothing entertaining about it, you're going to have to learn to be a good parent and figure out what your kid needs.
My book is entertaining. That is not true. It has a lot of like stories in it, and no, it is entertaining. Now I know that I need to go to conferences and like parenting conferences and do some different stuff that I haven't done.
But Trish, you didn't do this to entertain people. You told kids that you told people you need to understand your kid's brain. My point isn't it isn't a good book. It's a great book. I read it in like 2 readings. But for most of us, if it's not a page turner and I can't wait to get to the next page, then it's not going to sell a lot of copies. It just isn't, right? In the big picture of how do you sell 150,000 books, it's got to be a page turner that grabs you. So most of this is like, okay, it's Baldacci and Patterson and all that. You and Trish have written serious book for serious people. And yes, Trish's book is very readable. And I found some of her examples humorous, just burst out laughing funny. You could just see her daughters fighting and her sorting this out, right? She and Chuck sorting it out. But for most of us, I'm going to look at your cover. I'm going to look at your title. And I might open a page. You've got 30 seconds to make your sale. Have you done that? American Dirt did that.
Yeah.
The next 1,000 books that were better written on immigration did not do that. Remember this, 50 Shades of Grey, The Martian are written at the 9th grade level and below your belt. And these people are multimillionaires, right? And romance novels. I'm not telling you to go do that. But I am telling you that you've got under 60 seconds, you've got 30 seconds to convince somebody to take an interest in your book. And most people spend no time on that part. And they should spend a huge amount of time on that part. Trish, I love your cover. And I love your book. This is no put down to anybody. I mean,
Oh, no, I'm aware of that. And Sandra has to take a lot of the credit for the cover. I mean, that was some of the stuff that she was really good at putting the book together. So we got to give her credit where credit is due, because my book was a tricky book to put together, and because it has all those sidebars and
there's lots of resources in the world that can help you with that, Denise, but I would look at that. And then send your book to the Council of Churches. If your church liked it, maybe they all will.
I worked for the Church Council of Greater Seattle, and I did send actually one of the first books I sent out was to the director, because I used to work there. And I hope he publicized it. He said he was quoting from it, but I don't know whether he got it out to a lot of people. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I went to a lot of avenues. I went to Samaritans meetings, people who go out in the desert and leave water. I networked every place I could, every publication I knew how to write for. But because I self-published, I wanted to know, it's 4 years, it's not a new book anymore, but I still think it's relevant. And I would like, it's a message that I would like to get out to a lot of people. There is no reason to fear the undocumented.
Amen.
Right. They are part of our communities. I work with the Latino Community Association here in Central Oregon, and it's still relevant. But I feel like because I self-published that I blew it, that I should have looked harder for a publisher.
So Denise, let me tell you something real quick. So what I would do is I would go through that book again. I would do a certain amount of editing, maybe add another story, maybe add somebody from Central Oregon, since the book is so short, because it's hard to get a book published and out there if you only have 20,000 words. They're looking really usually for a minimum of 60,000. So if you can get the stories of a couple other people, especially if you're working in Central Oregon, and then the other thing is give it a new title and a new cover, and you can republish it. Or you can send it out to, you can send it out to agents, you can send it out to independent publishers, whatever. But David's points are also very true. I wouldn't try to where your book is now, because it has been so, and you'll need to update it with a more current story anyway, even though it's still relevant. But what you're doing is very relevant. I would use that story, but if it's 20,000 words per story, then you could write 2 more stories easily for 2 more families. And I don't think it'll take you 15 months each to do that. But my point is, and you can tie them all together and figure, we could talk about this separately. But my point is if you have a book that you've self-published that you want to republish, if you edit it and give it a new cover and a new name, you could republish it, either self-publish it or send it out to agents or independent publishers. You're not stuck with where you are. I know you feel stuck, you're not stuck.
I agree with that totally. The other thing, using analogies here, but there was you go back and look at the Apollo 13 accident, the great space accident where the 3 astronauts got back home through a miracle. So James Lovell, who was the commander, wrote a book called Lost Moon. Okay, that meant something to him because he told his wife, Marilyn, when he got to the moon, he was going to name a mountain after her. Well, that he and his wife are the only two humans on Earth that know that. And lost moon doesn't mean anything to anybody. So Steven Spielberg, somebody stumbled over it and said, there's a great story here, but he didn't write it the way it could be written. So he took the cover, he changed it to Apollo 13 and tied it to some things, and it sold 1 million copies. It hadn't sold 3,000 copies in 10 or 12 years. What Trish is saying is important, and take this, what I would never start any book with undocumented. Aliens you shouldn't be afraid of. You know, I don't know, something where I look at it and go, oh, like even Trish helped me with the title, but where I came up with the pale-faced lie is there's tension there, right? There's a certain amount of what the heck is this about? The cover I picked because it was a picture of me, and when I was 3 years old, and I'm scared to death, and I'm standing next to my family's station wagon in the middle of the desert. So I came up with that because I thought somebody's going to look at that, and they're not going to know what David Crow went through or who the hell he is or anything, right? I'm nobody. But they're going to look at that and they're going to say, okay, I might even open that cover. Yeah. And I hate that we're in the business. I feel like we're a bunch of Miss America contestants, and we're walking in our bathing suits down the runway. It's just like, and you've got these gawking men going, oh yeah, she's better looking. Our book titles are kind of like that. Watch somebody in a bookstore or in an airport, again, when COVID lifts, watch how they approach a book. And they walk up and they kind of look at it. Maybe I should pick this up. Maybe I shouldn't. It's a very weird, instantaneous, I like you, I don't like you thing. Right? And I hate it. But work it to your advantage. Work it to your advantage. In fact, Denise, I'd recommend you read American Dirt and read it carefully. Set your book aside, say, where am I telling the same story better? So the goal of these two immigrants was to get to American Dirt. They're in Mexico, and these drug lords are killing their whole family, and this woman and her kid are going to get murdered if they don't get moving. This is not unlike what people go through, am I right? So I want to know about their journey. And their journey's fascinating. They run into everything. Prostitutes, drug addicts, people who want to steal their identity. Then they get through all this. And at the end, you just want to know that they got across the border and they're going to be okay. Tell that story in your words. If you want it to be a textbook, that's one thing. If you want it to be a readable story, like Trish said, you don't have to throw in any sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Just package it in a way that people say, oh, this is really interesting. I want to know about this, or this is a good read, right? How many times has somebody said, this is a good read, and you trusted them and you read it? And maybe you promoted it. Maybe you actually tell everybody, review on Goodreads, Amazon, every single time. If you haven't asked every human being that you know to review your book on Goodreads and Amazon, you are making a mistake. If you ever get it to 1,000, Amazon pays attention. 3 times Amazon has run promotions on my book at their expense because I got enough reviews. They did a thing at Christmas on Kindle. I sold 8,000 books between December 24th and January 6th because they did the review. Audible put my book on the top 5, and that's worth $10,000 an hour if you can keep it there. I was ahead of Michelle.
All right, let's do
And who else was I ahead of for a week? For a week, I was ahead of Michelle Obama.
Wow. Wow. You
Um,
convinced me. I wanna write- I wanna read
Congratulations on that.
that too.
Well,
Okay.
again, nothing I've said is anything that you can't do.
Great.
All right, one more question, and this we can kind of open up if anybody has any other suggestions on this, please put them in the chat. But help finding beta readers. Susan says she doesn't really have folks that she knows that can give that kind of feedback.
You guys have a really nice group here, your Central Oregon group. Do you promote each other's work by that kind of thing? Do you have, I'm looking at a pretty strong community here. And I know Trish well, so I know the rest of you are Trish type people, which means you're very, very good at what you do. Can you find 5 people to help in your community? Because I'm lucky in that I have a lot of friends that'll tell me what's right and wrong with me all the time. And some of us, like my wife would never feel comfortable. She would never get anybody to read one thing on a beta. I mean, we're just opposites. And a lot of people just we don't have that kind of friends. Like, you know, I'm not going to knock on my next door neighbor and say, can I borrow a cup of sugar and will you read my book? So I get that. We're all different. But I can't tell you how important it is to have people who aren't vested in your book to say, this doesn't work for me. Why did you come up with this title? I read the first 3 pages. I don't like it. I like you enough to read to page 10 and I get it. You need to repackage this. Like one of my best examples, Trish, when we were at the Southern California Writers Conference, I didn't know Trish well, but I liked her and I thought her presentations were great, right? So, but one of the things they did, and this is why writing conferences are really great. At 9 o'clock every single night, you had a published author, somebody good, and you get 7 or 8 people, and you could read one chapter from your book. Pick any chapter. So I started my chapter with something that happened to me in 4th grade. My family was going through a really, really bad time. My sister had swallowed a bottle of aspirin. She didn't want to live because of the tension in my family. My mom was about to be abandoned, mentally ill, 4th grade education. And there's all these things going wrong in my life. But believe it or not, in the midst of all this, my mother called the principal of my elementary school. And she said, my son David loves baseball more than anything in life. And he loves the New York Yankees. And they're in the World Series. And back in the day, they played World Series games during the day, during the week, which is really stupid. And they figured that out, and they don't do that anymore. It's the 7th game of the World Series, and it's on a Thursday. And she said, my boy would give anything to watch the last couple of innings in your office on your TV. The principal was so amused that he did it. So I'm writing my chapter, and this is sort of pre-Trish and pre-150,000. So I opened the chapter. Mom called the principal of my school. She said, my boy David loves baseball more than life. And I take you through the chapter. So at the end of it, everybody's hand is up. No, that's not how it happened. You woke up that day. You're a total terror. You got to school and you stomped on those little triangular milk cartons and you shot milk up the worker lady's leg like you always do and really irritated the heck out of her. You threw a spitball and hit this one kid and you kicked the big ball in the morning at Violet, who you have a huge crush on, and she stuck her tongue out. And when you got to school, you pulled off her rubber band on her ponytail and broke her pencil. And you did so many things wrong between the time you woke up and got to school So when the teacher said, David Crow, the principal wants to see you, you wet your pants because you are a disaster. And what does he want to see you about this time? So in my mind, I'm rehearsing. I'll never do it again. Don't call dad. I'm really sorry. It wasn't me. Trish did it and blamed me for it because she's a brat and I'm not. And you get to the principal's office and he says, do you know why you're here? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again, ever. And he said, no, your mother called. You and I are going to watch the last 4 innings of the World Series. That's a chapter. The way you wrote it, why would I read one more word after the first paragraph? I know what happened. Think
Right.
about how you're presenting yourself. And it doesn't take rocket science to move stuff around. What you'll find, I think, in my second book, because it's fiction, I probably read over 100 books on scenes and how to build a novel, how to do timing, how to arrange. And every single thing that I've read and learned is you can take the same story and do it the right way and sell a million books, and do it the wrong way. And like, I'm not reading another word of this. And all successful authors are very, very good at this in every genre. You're entertaining people. You're making them interested. Put your best foot forward. What's your best foot? Denise, I want you to read American Dirt, read your book, and take 10 pages of notes. What could I have done differently? Do what Trish said. You've got a buddy right there. I want a new cover. To be really honest, I don't like your cover. And I don't like your title. I like you, and I'm willing to say this to you because I want you to be successful and we're in the same community. But there's nothing about your title and your cover that does anything for me. I wouldn't even look at it. You need people to tell you that, who care about you and the process and want you to get to the next place. Very important.
The other thing, Denise, that would be interesting to see is it would be interesting to look at the manuscript and see if you could flesh out a story in a whole different way. Because if you only have 20,000 words and you talk to that woman for such a length of time, my guess is you have more of a story there.
I totally agree with Trish. Remember this, and again, Trish's book has got a lot of funny stuff about how parents interact with kids and what their brain's doing, which means to me that book will continue to do well. But most of us don't see ourselves as entertainers. We don't see ourselves as salespeople. We see ourselves as educators. We see ourselves as information people. But one of the best pieces of advice I ever got is find 2 or 3 of your friends who will put up with you. And mine generally won't unless I'm buying them alcohol and food. But if you can find them, tell them what your book's about. So I have a very good friend that I hadn't seen in a little while. We ride bikes together, but we hadn't seen each other in a year because of COVID. And he was a great beta reviewer, really great, on my first book. And he said, David, tell me about your next book. And I'm like, I really don't want to. He said, no, tell me. So I started telling him. And the next thing I knew, I had a ton of advice. So tell somebody about your book. Denise, what are you trying to do here? and see how they react to you. Well, that's interesting, but why not more about this? Or, yeah, there's nothing to be afraid of, but that's a generic thing. Make it human. Bring me a person. Maybe this undocumented person has a wife, 3 kids. They've been here 15 years and they're terrified of crossing the border to go to a funeral or something. Find me something about them that I can relate to. You're trying to relate them to people who are documented, who are citizens, who don't have this fear. American Dirt scares the hell out of you immediately, because these people are about to make a perilous journey they don't want to make because otherwise they're dead. And they're willing to do things that people would never do if they didn't absolutely have to do it to survive. And I start on that ride, and the last page, I'm like, wow, I wish I was friends with the author. I wish that I have felt that what they felt. You know, there are 2 or 3 points in that where she runs into 2 teenage girls, and they're old enough to be sexually assaulted. You know, they're like 13, 14, 15, and you know, a very dangerous age probably for kids traveling without protection, right? Their predators are going to grab them because they can do things with them that they shouldn't, and these kids can't protect themselves. So they throw that in, and they throw in some guys that are trying to steal their money, and one guy does get their money away from them. Scare me, make me feel what an undocumented person feels. Make me as a reader think they're valuable, that they deserve a different look from our immigration system, maybe a path to citizenship, whatever you think is the best thing. But invest me in these people. And
David, I'm gonna, oh, go ahead.
no, make me root for them till the
I'm
end.
gonna wrap it up for us now. Pardon me?
I said, just make me root for you.
I'm gonna, yeah, and I agree, absolutely agree with you. I think whether we want to admit it or not, we're in the entertainment business, and we want to keep our reader interested. We want them to read the next sentence. Thank you so much. Lots and lots of good information and a very lively conversation from all of you. Thank you all for coming tonight. And we'll see you hopefully next month. And David, again, this has been great. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So big round of applause for you. You bet.
Thanks, Trish. Yeah.
You
Thanks
bet.
all of you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. All right. Good night, everybody.
good night.
Thank you very much, David. I'm going to go buy your book.
And thank you so much, David, because I know you're 3 hours ahead where you are.
Yeah.
A pleasure to be with you all. Have a great evening.